So we're going to start by looking at what a couple of top colleges say on their admissions website when they discuss extracurriculars. Because I think extracurriculars tend to be the part of college applications that feel the fuzziest, that sometimes feel the least clear. It's not totally, readily apparent what is considered impressive. Whereas, like the SAT, obviously you want to get the highest score you can. GPA, you want the highest GPA you can. Um, but what are colleges really looking for when they talk about extracurriculars? So we'll go ahead and just read these, and then we'll chat about kind of what the takeaways are at the end. So from Stanford, learning about your extracurricular activities and non-academic interests helps us understand your potential contributions to the Stanford community. Students often assume our primary concern is the number of activities in which a student participates. In fact, an exceptional depth of experience in one or two activities may demonstrate your passion more than minimal participation in 5 or 6 clubs. You may also hold down a job or have family responsibilities. These are as important as any other extracurricular activity. In general, we want to understand the impact you've had at your job, in your family, in a club, in your school, or in the larger community, and we want to learn of the impact that experience has had on you. Okay, so that's interesting. We will talk a little bit more about what all that means, but first, let's also take a look at what MIT admissions website says. So this is called Beekeeping to Building Reactors. We read applications from students interested in everything from apiculture, which is beekeeping, to building nuclear reactors in their garages. We realize our applicants are very committed to their schoolwork and with their limited time choose their extracurricular activities carefully. We also realize that students in the US have a huge array of extracurriculars to choose from and write about in their MIT application, and that students in other countries may not have access to such a diverse range of options. Okay, that's MIT, another very, very prestigious institution. And now we learned what the official name for beekeeping is. So perfect. All right, and then let's look at one more. You might have heard of this one, Harvard. Um, so, do you care about anything intellectual, extracurricular, or personal? And then they ask, what's the quality of your activities? Do you appear to have a genuine commitment or leadership role? So, these are obviously three different colleges, and they might be looking for slightly different things kind of on the margin. But I think, something that really jumps out from all of their admissions websites when they're discussing extracurriculars is a few things. The first thing that they really, make super clear kind of across the three websites is that they are not just interested in the number of extracurricular activities that you are doing. Stanford, I think, says is most succinctly, they say exceptional depth of experience in one or two activities that could demonstrate your passion much more than minimal participation in 5 or 6 clubs. Um, and I think that's something that you can see as well in Harvard's admissions website. They say, what's the quality of your activities? Do you have a commitment or a leadership role in them? Um, so I think, right off the bat, kind of when you're starting off in high school, it's very easy to assume that kind of like more is better with extracurricular activities, right? Because that's true about other things in the college application process, like, a higher SAT score is better, more AP classes is better, more A pluses is better. But in extracurriculars, that's not the case. Um, it's much, much more important that you pick a couple of things that you're really passionate about, that you can show some, amazing impact in, that you could take initiative in, that you could, start a club dedicated to some hobby or some passion of yours, and that you can become the president or win, some statewide competition. All of that is much more impressive than kind of a laundry list of, a couple of clubs that you would like show up for the weekly meetings for, but you didn't really participate in much beyond that. So, if you're ever in conversations with your other peers and they're talking about like, the million and one things that they're doing after school, don't panic. Just make sure that you're always focused on really tailoring yourself to kind of doing those 2 or 3, maybe 4, things that are really impactful to you and that you're able to really show commitment to. And you know what? If you're superhuman and you can show amazing commitment to a million things, so much the better for you. But for most of us, I think that naturally means we have to kind of limit the number of things we do. Okay, so that's the one thing. I think a second thing to draw your attention to, and this is most clear in the MIT admissions page, is that extracurriculars, and I sort of mentioned this at the top of the presentation, but they don't just have to be school clubs that you do. They don't have to be just debate or just Model UN or just the things that are offered at your school. Those are great extracurriculars. You should totally do them if you like them, and we will talk about them in depth. But your extracurricular can be anything. Apparently, it can be beekeeping. It can be an internship. It could be a side project that you have, coding a website. It could be a little research project that you're doing, on any number of things. And as Stanford mentioned, it can also include, family responsibilities or a paid job that you have outside of school. So make sure not to limit your definition of what counts as an extracurricular activity. It really is anything that is extracurricular, anything outside of the classroom. And in fact, some of the more unique extracurricular activities, writing a novel or beekeeping or building a nuclear reactor, in many ways, those can be the most interesting, I think, to college admissions officers. They can really set you apart. And in college admissions, the more you can set yourself apart, the better. Because they're looking at a lot of applications. A lot of kids are doing the same couple of clubs. Have the same resumes, have taken similar classes. And so the more you can make an admissions officer really stop and say, "Gee, like I haven't seen that before," and that you can exhibit that you're able to pursue your passions, even if those passions aren't the standard ones, kind of dictated to you by the availability of certain clubs at your school. Then I think so much the better for you. So those are my at least two main takeaways from these kind of admissions pages. So I'd encourage you to look at the admissions pages of the colleges you're applying to. I suspect you'll find something very similar across all of them. I can't really think off the top of my head of a college that would tell you on their website, like, we only care about the number of things that you put down in your resume. But definitely take a look around, if you don't believe me, or if you just want to get a sense of what your particular dream college has to say kind of on the subject. So, as I mentioned, extracurriculars, they're a little fuzzy. It's hard to tell, what is good versus what is bad. But I think this at least gives us kind of a framework to think about how we engage in extracurricular activities and the level of commitment that we put into them. All right. So that being said, what is an extracurricular activity? It can be a lot of things, and we will actually be discussing all of these examples today. But again, remember, just because I don't mention something, on this list or throughout the presentation today, doesn't mean that it is not an extracurricular activity. So a couple of examples: student government, classic; academic teams and clubs. So this is things like Quiz Bowl or Science Bowl. The debate team, that was a personal favorite of mine. So, I'll talk quite a bit about that. The arts, internships, culture clubs, volunteer work and community service, or any kind of club that revolves around that. So National Honor Society or Key Club are two that come to mind. The student newspaper, a part-time job, athletics, and then we'll also chat a little bit at the end about personal projects and extracurricular activities that kind of generally fall outside of this mold. And again, those tend to be the most interesting, and they're also the most personalized. So perfect. So before we dive into a discussion of each of these, just kind of reiterating the point that we started to make earlier about what we could glean from these admissions websites. So let's take a look at two sample students. There's student A. They do the following activities. They're in the French club, they're in JV swimming, they're on varsity track and field, they're on the debate team, they're in the yearbook, they're on the school newspaper, they're on the marketing club, they're on the ski club. If this person kind of came up to you at school and they told you that they were involved with all these things, you might be like, wow, like, how do they have the time to do all this? And like, am I falling behind? I'm not in, 8 extracurricular activities. I'm only in 4. Like, this person will definitely get into any college they apply to. Fair enough. That is a fairly long list, and you might question how it is physically possible to do that. But then let's take a look at their participation. So they're a member in the French club, JV swimming, they swim breaststroke. That was my preferred stroke in swimming. But anyways, they do discus on the track and field. Cool. They're a member of the debate team. They take pictures for the yearbook. They cover board meetings for the newspaper. They're a member of the marketing club. They're a member of the ski club. And then awards and achievements. They took 8th at state at, I presume, varsity track and field. Cool. This person clearly is a good student. They try hard. They care a lot. They're doing these extracurricular activities. Good for them. But I think something you'll notice is just kind of like the level of participation, right? And that's kind of taking us back to Harvard's question here. What's the quality of your activities? Do you appear to have a genuine commitment to them? And here it's kind of hard really to make the case that this person has a super genuine commitment. I mean, clearly they're showing up to the meetings, right? They're a member of all of these clubs. Presumably that entails actually, showing up. Um, and they're on these sports teams. They're making an effort, but like, are they really participating fully? Are they taking initiative? Are they leaders? I think from this, it's kind of hard to make that assumption. Um, and I think that's something worth keeping in mind. Like, these are the kinds of things when college admissions officers look at this sort of resume, they're like, wow, like, this kid works hard, but they haven't done anything, super extraordinary, sorry. They're just kind of doing this laundry list of activities, but they haven't done anything amazing in any one particular activity, right? And college admissions officers, they'll see a ton of applications like this, and it's hard to see what really sets this person apart. Which sounds a little harsh, but when you're thinking about really trying to put your best foot forward and make yourself stand out in the admissions process, I think it's important to keep in mind. So that's student A. Why don't we take a look then at student B? So they are in half the number of clubs as student A, right? They're in only 4. They are on the varsity track and field. They are on the running club. They're on the school newspaper, and they're in the Young Writers Club. And then, okay, so you're like, all right, that's not that many activities, but let's look at their participation. So for varsity track and field, they ran the 400K, and they were the all-state runner-up. Cool, wow, that's pretty impressive, right? For the running club, they were the vice president. They helped organize a 5K charity with over 100 participants. That sounds really good. Sounds like they really took leadership there. For the school newspaper, they were the editor-in-chief, and they won a high school newspaper award. Wow. That again, really showing participation. And then finally for the Young Writers Club, they were just a member, but they won a local short story contest. So, I think the takeaway here is that student B, they are involved in far fewer clubs, but their participation and their commitment to them is much, much greater. And I think that really shows in how impressive this person's resume comes across, right? They've won awards and achievements for the things that they're involved in. They've clearly taken on leadership roles, whether or not they're official, like being editor-in-chief or vice president, or whether or not they come through in kind of the achievements that they have. So, being a runner-up at state or organizing a big charity 5K. I think another thing that's interesting to point out about student B is that they're in 4 clubs or 4 extracurriculars, but they're really centered around 2 main interests, right? So the first 2 are around running, second 2 are about writing. And you might think to yourself, like, oh no, like that's not so great because you want to show that you're good in like a bajillion different things, right? But actually, I think oftentimes college admissions officers want to see that you have 1 or 2 like core passions or interests that kind of run through all of the things that you do, and that there's some sort of narrative to the things that you've chosen, rather than taking just a shotgun approach and like just doing a bunch of different things because that's kind of the expectation for getting into a good college. So I think when you look at student B, you're like, wow, this is a person who has 2 very like concrete things that they are passionate about and care about. They love running and they love writing, and those are probably the things that they're going to keep doing throughout college, right? And that's why they selected those extracurricular activities. It wasn't random. Whereas, you look at student A, and it's hard to like get a sense of what this person really cares about, right? Like, it's 8 different activities and they're quite different, right? There's not like a huge like overlap or similarity between them. And it's like French, swimming, track and field, debate, yearbook, newspaper, marketing, skiing. It's hard to understand what this person is passionate about and what kinds of things they're going to bring to your college campus. So I think, yeah, so the takeaway, very similar to kind of what we were talking about earlier, but make sure that you really just pick a couple of things that you really care a lot about and just hone in on those things. And, so much the better if they're kind of clustered around a couple of really clear interests that you have there that you're able to kind of weave a narrative around. And I think, all of this is not to say that like you need to come into high school and pick those 2 or 3 things and stick with them throughout high school, and that like you have to know what those passions are when you're 14 years old, because that's kind of crazy. But I think the approach I would encourage you to take is like, try as many things as you want as a freshman. Maybe you do actually try 8 different things. But midway through your freshman year or by the end of your freshman year, take stock. Think about what clubs or activities really energized you or got you excited, or that you think you have the most potential to be really exceptional at. Like, maybe you find out that you're a really great runner and you like already qualified to state as a 14-year-old. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of thing that you should keep doing, right? Um, and then like as you approach your sophomore year and your junior year, which is quite important for college applications, really start whittling it down to those 3 or 4 things that you really care about. And you'd be doing yourself a favor, because I think it's very difficult and unsustainable to do 8 extracurricular activities on top of all the studying that you have to do, on top of studying for the SAT and finding time to sleep. So that's another incentive, I think. It's always better, both for your resume and for your own mental health, I think, to pick the couple of things that you really care about, and dedicate yourself to those, sort of going forward from high school. So that would be my advice. You don't have to know the answer to your 3 main passions starting high school, but as you explore and as you better understand yourself, I think that's something that you'll be well positioned to do. Okay, perfect. So now we're actually going to talk about specific examples of extracurriculars, and then I think we'll leave quite a bit of time at the end to answer questions, because I think extracurricular activities, people often have very specific questions. You have your own specific set of extracurriculars that are probably different from any other person. So I think it's most helpful to prioritize a lot of time for answering questions. But with that being said, our first extracurricular that we'll be discussing is student government. I think this is a pretty classic one. When people think about the overachiever in high school, they think of somebody who is the student body president, right? And like for good reason. I think colleges are quite impressed by students with leadership skills. Everybody wants leaders at their university, because those are the people who go on to graduate and do incredible things in the world, right? And there's not much of a better way to demonstrate leadership skills than to hold a position in student government. Um, it requires a lot of pretty impressive skills, namely like, giving a speech to your entire high school and getting your student body to like you so much they elect you, I think is one step. Um, but it's also important to, not just get the position and name, but to do something interesting with it. So, at my high school, I actually wasn't part of the student government, but I know that our student body president helped put together a big fundraiser for sick children kind of in our area, and they were able to raise quite a bit of money for those children, and it really drove like a huge impact. We had a huge assembly for it, and there was media coverage, um, which was like incredible, obviously, because it was like a really good thing to do, right? But I think that's exactly the kind of thing that looks great on resumes. So it's not just that you won a popularity contest and you were elected president, um, but it's also that you use that opportunity to do something. You took some sort of initiative. You planned and put on some sort of big event. And even if it's something as simple as like putting on a homecoming dance or something, like that's something that you're, I think, able to write about. I managed a X $1,000 event, and like I booked a venue and I advertised the event, and this many people showed up, and like we raised this much money. That's kind of a separate pro tip. As many numbers as you can work into your resume, the better. So it always looks good to say like we had this number of participants, or like we had this percent increase in attendance. It's always better, like, it's easier kind of for the admissions officer to understand the impact you drove, as opposed to being vague. So kind of a side note, that's a great way to talk about those things. But yeah, in general, I think student government, obviously a really great opportunity for you to kind of flex those leadership skills, and it gives you a pretty wide amount of power to go out and do something that's really incredible within the school, and that you could very easily, I think, mention in your application, maybe even write an essay about. So all in all, student government, excellent kind of option for you there. But if that's not your thing, we can move on. So there's also academic teams, and this, as I mentioned earlier, this is things like they can be competitive. They can be like the science bowl or the quiz bowl, or like the math or physics Olympiad. Um, Although those might not be academic teams so much as competitions, I'm not totally sure. But at any rate, you could join an academic team. It can also just be something like the math club, or like the environmental club, or the history club or something, right? Just, it could also just be a club where you can be in after school and you talk about a subject that you find fascinating. So it doesn't have to be competitive, but I think many are, especially the more formal and institutionalized kind of classic ones that people think of. So what does this tell you, or what does this tell admissions officers about you? Because that's always something you should be asking yourself, right? It's like, what does this extracurricular or this passion or this portion of my resume, like, what is it telling the admissions officer? Because at the end of the day, you're curating a story about yourself to the admissions officer that tells them something about the kind of person you are and the kinds of things that you will do on their campus and the kinds of things you will do when you graduate their campus, right? That will bring their university much acclaim. So what does joining an academic team tell an admissions officer about you? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's that, when it comes to rigorous academics, you don't shy away, but you embrace a challenge. Um, and whether your subject preference is math or science or some other area or focus, demonstrating your love for learning is always in your favor. It always looks great. So I think what's really great about joining an academic team is that it says, like, I don't just take AP calculus because I want to get a good grade or whatever, or because I have to. I take it because I genuinely like it, and like I can exhibit the fact that I like it by the fact that I started a whole team for it, and like I go compete on my own time. Like I spend my weekends, doing math. Um, I think it really is a very clear way to show your love of learning. In terms of the kinds of leadership that you can show through this, or the kinds of initiative, I think there are a couple. The first, as with kind of any club, is starting the club if it doesn't exist at your school. Um, and if it does exist at your school, then occupying a leadership position would probably look like being elected president, or vice president, or any other kind of leadership position. So I think that's one relatively straightforward way to do that. Other ways to show your commitment are by showing some sort of success kind of at a regional or state, or hey, even national level. A lot of these academic teams, the competitive ones at least, do have kind of competitions at that level. And if you're able to really train for it and to have some sort of success at that kind of scale, I think that looks amazing kind of on a college application. That's definitely something that will make your admissions officer stop and say, hey, like this person's really good at this, and they clearly care about it. And I think it's also a pretty clear way to exhibit some passion about a topic that you have that you might go on to study in college, right? Like what better way to show that you're going to be like a great history major than winning some sort of history competition, right? So, academic teams, I think they tend to be a little more intense. They require a little more, preparation and work outside of just the club meetings. But I think the payoff for them, it can be really incredible. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Definitely think about the kinds of academic subjects that you care the most about. And hey, if a team doesn't exist, you should go start one and see what kinds of competitions exist kind of near you, and how you can kind of delve into that passion. All right, debating. This was a big one for me. I helped start our debate team in high school, and then I did it for all 4 years at Stanford. So if anyone has any debate related questions, would be happy to answer them at the end. But, again, what does being on the debate team tell the admissions officer about you? A couple of things. The first is that, students on the debate team are pretty likely to be engaged on topics of the day. You're likely to just know a lot about international relations and economics and social justice and all of the many, many different topics that you're required to debate in high school. And it also shows, I think, that you're able to think critically on your feet. You're not afraid to speak out. These are all qualities, of course, that colleges really care about in prospective students. It shows that, I think more than that too, it shows that, you care about hearing other people's perspectives, that you're able to look at an issue and see, multiple different perspectives on it and multiple arguments, on for or against. And I think that it shows that you're probably likely to be a pretty logical, pretty tolerant person, who cares about opinions based on their merits and on the facts, rather than anything else. So I think it definitely sends a lot of good messages, and some of the most successful politicians and lawyers and people within all sorts of industries did debate in high school. So I think it's a very good indicator of a very hardworking personality, and somebody who's going to accomplish great things. As a side note, I was looking at this list of alumni from I think it was Yale's debate team, and they'd all gone on to do incredible stuff. So definitely worth looking into if you're interested. But I digress. Yeah. So in terms of how you can share opportunity here, or opportunities to show leadership here, excuse me, there's tons. Again, you could start the club, which is what I did. And that's usually not terribly difficult. I think you have to just find a teacher who's willing to sponsor the club. You have to get people interested in joining it. So I think what I did was I put up posters, and then I actually you know, I didn't cut class. I got permission to leave my class and go to other classrooms that were going on that I thought were full of students who might want to join the debate team. So I think I went to like the AP English class, the AP History class, AP Government class. I selected a few subjects where I thought people might be interested in joining the debate team. And then I got people to join. It was super fun. And then, we actually put together the funds. We went to a phone banking session that helped us get funding for a school bus to take us to a tournament. It was a lot of fun. But all this is to say, there are a lot of steps, I think, to starting a club that you look pretty impressive on a college resume and show that you're willing to take initiative to put things together when they don't exist. If a debate team does exist, you can always become the president, the captain. Those are kind of the low-hanging fruit of showing commitment. And then, of course, there's competitive success. So debate in America is crazy. There's so many levels that you can get involved at, right? You could win local and regional competitions and statewide competitions, which is mostly what I did, because I actually did not know very much at all about the national circuit. Or if you do happen to know a lot about the national circuit, you can compete at that level. Which is obviously super impressive. There's a national championship every year. If you're able to do well at that, looks great on a resume, of course. There are summer camps that you can go to. Those aren't so much necessarily about padding your resume as they are about getting better at the activity. And then you could even compete, believe it or not, at the international level. We have a Team America that represents us at the Global World Debating Championships. Anyways, I'm getting carried away, but the point is, there are many, many levels at which you could compete and debate. And, obviously it's fine if you're not, on Team America. Most of us can't be. But if you're able to even win just regional competitions, I think that can look really good. And, definitely speaks a lot, I think, to your tenacity and your ability to kind of put a lot of effort into the activity and shows that you were successful at it, right? So that's kind of my spiel on debate. Would highly recommend it if that's something that that stands out to you. And it's pretty easy, I think, to get involved competitively. Cool, the arts. I think this is one that people tend to forget about a little bit when they think about extracurriculars. I think people tend to think of the classic ones like newspaper and debate, right? But the arts are absolutely a form of extracurricular. So that can mean the creative arts, like, music or drama or visual arts. And what this tells extracurricular, not extracurricular, admissions officers is that you're open-minded, that you might be eccentric, and that you think outside the box, that, that you're a very creative person. And these are qualities, of course, that add to campus life, which is a bonus in the eyes of any college admissions officer, right? So admissions officers, they're not just thinking about like, people who will be the best at like, the things that they study, or people who will be captains of the debate team. They also care a lot about artistic life on campus, right? Cultural life, a cappella groups and putting on plays, and visual arts. Like they care about making sure that these are all alive and flourishing on their campuses. And so, of course, they also care about creating a pipeline of creative and artistically minded students who will kind of occupy those roles. So there are many ways to get involved with art, I think, as an extracurricular. The easiest probably is doing it through your school. So taking AP art class, being a part of your drama production or, your musical at your school, being part of the jazz band or the orchestra, right, or the choir. I think there are tons of ways to get involved at the school level, and those tend to be, I think, the most straightforward. And you can still obviously show quite a level of commitment, right? Like nobody's going to say like, oh, this person, like they were just like the lead in this musical, like they were just checking a box, they weren't really that involved. Like I think it's very self-evident that that kind of thing takes a ton of commitment and looks super impressive, especially if you're able to, be the lead in a play and also, go to school and do well in your classes and do other extracurriculars. And then outside of the school level, there are ways to get involved. So, you could be involved with local productions that aren't put on by your school. Or you could just, be in the, pursue your artistic passions at home. You could, draw at home. You could write a book. And you could submit to all sorts of artistic competitions that exist. I think the National Key competition was one that I heard of some of my peers entering in and getting, silver and gold prizes, which obviously looks amazing. So all that to say, there are tons of ways to get involved in art. They don't have to be just through your school, although that tends to be one that is an easier point of entry, I think. And yeah, I think obviously these things they look quite incredible, especially if you're able to get some sort of, recognition or some sort of achievement kind of in the field. So definitely always consider that, and don't think that it doesn't count as an extracurricular, because it absolutely does. So awesome. The newspaper. This is another big one for me when I was in high school. So near and dear to my heart. Being published in any form, I think, whether it's a student newspaper or another form. So again, it can be, you could have an internship at a local newspaper. I knew some people at Stanford who did that in high school, and that obviously also looks impressive. Perhaps even more so because, you're actually involved with a for-profit, like a real newspaper, full of real journalists, and you were able to kind of get into that environment and thrive, which looks great. And it's quite an impressive accomplishment. And I think most college courses, most colleges obviously care that you're able to write well, right? That's why they require it as kind of a basic course. And so being published demonstrates to admissions officers that you're not just capable of writing, but that you're actually good at it, right? And you write things that other people want to read, and you're so good at it that you're in charge of the newspaper at some level. I think something that's pretty great about newspaper that you can highlight in your resume is just how much it requires of you, right? Like if you're the editor, for example, you're often writing your own articles. Sometimes you're taking pictures. You might even be like drawing, cartoons or illustrations to go along with them. And then on top of that, you're also like deciding what stories get written and assigning people to those stories based on their strengths, and you're editing those people's stories, and you might be managing a website on which all of those stories is published, and you might also be in charge of making sure that like a physical version of the newspaper gets published. So that's just so much, I think, logistical work, and just shows that you're really able to be a true leader and that you're able to kind of manage something of such complex operation. Is pretty great, and I think would obviously be very compelling to any admissions officer. Um, Again, in terms of how you show commitment and get involved, starting a newspaper if it doesn't exist. And apologies if I sound like a broken record at this point, but it's always a very great way to kind of show initiative. Being the editor in chief, or even just editor, or even like editor of some, you could be in charge of photography, for example, or of graphic design, or you could be in charge of the technical aspect of it, right? Like actually maintaining the website. I think any of those obviously look pretty great. And then to the extent that you're able to actually, get published in a local newspaper outside of your school, I think that also looks pretty incredible, right? For the reasons that we talked about earlier. So student newspaper, all in all, is great, and, kind of is able to exhibit your leadership across multiple different criteria. Volunteer work and community service. So if you enjoy art, you can volunteer at a local children's center to help kids with their creative process. If you love to play music, you can volunteer to play at a local senior center. If you love sports, you can coach your local little league. If you're an animal lover, there's always shelters nearby that are in need of great volunteers. So I think, community service definitely says to admissions officers that you're somebody, unsurprisingly, who cares about their community, who cares about helping people who are in need, and who's very mission driven, right? So, I think colleges, while they also want people who go on to be lawyers and, investment bankers and consultants and all that good stuff, they also definitely want people who go on to serve the community and to do good in that way, right? Because that's obviously part of their mission, and that's something they hope their graduates go on to do as well, and go on to live their life in a way that they care about the people around them, right? And it also indicates, that you're going to be a kind and compassionate member of the community at your university, right? That you're going to, um, really advocate for other people, and kind of give back to that community. So I think that's what it tells the admissions officer, and it's obviously a very compelling, thing to tell them. In terms of how you get involved, again, very tactically, as I mentioned kind of at the top, there are sometimes student organizations that are dedicated to volunteer work. So National Honor Society and Key Club are the two that existed in my school. So you can get involved there. Again, if you're able to show some leadership, or, become the president or something, so much the better. And that's a really great way to kind of coordinate, I think, school activities. Something really impressive that you can do kind of throughout school in that capacity is, for example, putting on charity events, right? The example I gave earlier of kids in my school putting on an event to raise money for sick children kind of in our region. And again, that's a great kind of activity to do, because you can really clearly say, like, look, we put on this event, we raised this much money, this many people turned out. And we were able to help these people who were in need, which is great. And then if you don't want to do something, with a group or through your school, you can also just, volunteer on your own. And I encourage you, kind of as this list demonstrates, to pick a volunteer activity that is important to you in some way, and that would make sense to the admissions officer. So something that I do right now, not so much in high school because I didn't know it existed, but I volunteer with a group that helps create debate programs kind of in underserved areas. And that obviously is something that's important to me because I love debate and I did it all throughout high school and college, right? So to the extent that you're able to find something that you care about and that really matters to you, I think that's, even better because it'll, be very obvious to the admissions officer that it's something that you cared about. And it's also just better for you because it's something that you'll care more about and you'll really feel, great about kind of being a member of and giving back to, right? So I think anything that you can do to kind of make those things resonate more with yourself and more, be more genuine. Um, I think it's, truly amazing. So definitely something to keep in mind. And I would really consider, really recommend that you do this, not just, of course, for the college application, and also because it's just a good thing to do. So there's culture clubs and movements. So this means joining a club or a movement. So for example, focusing on anti-bullying campaigns and acceptance of others. Colleges, of course, they value students who are active in promoting diversity and culture now more than ever before. I think, there's just so much going on lately that colleges really care about having an empathetic student base that cares a lot about these issues and, is going to go out of their way to make other people feel welcome regardless of their background, right? And being involved in this in some capacity shows that you have compassion for others and the strength of character to speak up for what you believe in. So, you can help start movements within your school. You can organize people to rally for a particular cause or other. You can join a club. So there are, pro LGBT clubs. There are feminist clubs. There are culture clubs related to like different races and ethnicities and backgrounds. Tons of ways to get involved with this. I encourage you to find one or start one yourself for a cause that you're really passionate about. And this is a particularly great one, I think. And it's usually one, again, that comes from the heart and is very rewarding. So absolutely something to consider. And finally, we have, oh, not finally, we have independent projects and research. So this is what I was talking about earlier. This kind of encompasses the bucket of stuff that, isn't the classic, like, debate or student government, the stuff that, might be different or tailored to you. So here are some examples. One student made an independent blog and website and YouTube channel about a particular branch of philosophy. That's cool. I majored in philosophy. I can't say that I did this, but it sounds interesting. One student ran social media for a local political candidate, and another student focused on several projects related to minimalist items and launched a couple of Kickstarter projects. So these are really about your own passions and side projects and things, just cool things that you kind of want to do, right? That aren't necessarily related to a school club. But that really show some passion that you have, and I think are a really good indicator of drive and being able to be a self-starter, right? Because these are things that, it's not just a club that was readily available to you that you signed up for. This is something that required planning and foresight and passion and thought, and you had to go out and execute this thing on your own without somebody really guiding you. So I think it looks particularly impressive. Something else that you might classify under here is also like research at local universities is something that many kids do in high school, and it's actually not quite as difficult to get involved as you might think. What I did and what other people did was just find local professors who are doing work that you're interested in and just send out a bunch of emails and say like, look, hey, I'm a high school student, I really care about the work that you're doing for XYZ reason, and like obviously I'm willing to work for free, but I would really love to get involved, like, could I volunteer? And I think, you'll be surprised. Many professors, they like that other people take an interest in their work, and they'll be willing to take you on, especially if you're willing, if you're just asking to volunteer, you're not asking for a paid position. So, be bold, send out the message. The worst that they can do is say no. Another thing that you might classify under this is internships, which is, believe it or not, something that high schoolers can do. So if you're able to find a local, even just a small company that's willing to take you on as an intern and show that you have some corporate experience, I think that looks, really good. So definitely don't, disqualify these things just because they're not clubs or competitions that you could win. And then finally, let's talk about athletics. I think participating in sports is a great way to showcase your teamwork, your leadership skills. It shows that you place an emphasis on athletics and physical fitness. And some schools like Stanford, if you're truly exceptional at the sport, it may influence their decision, of course, about whether or not to admit you to Stanford. So definitely something to consider. Um, yeah, I think kind of general good advice is to do a sport. In high school, even if you're not particularly athletically inclined. I wasn't. But I did varsity swim team, and it kept me in good shape. And I think it's something that colleges, care a lot about. So definitely consider that. And great chance for leadership ability. You can be the captain of your team, and also obviously a great chance to have some achievements. Go to state, place well at districts. These are things that I was not able to do because I was not very good at swimming. But if that's something that you're good at and you have some talent at, absolutely, I think that looks incredible on a resume. So we'll kind of wrap up with what the perfect sort of combination of these things is. And again, this is just kind of a general framework. It doesn't mean that you have to fit this archetype, but just a good kind of framework to think through extracurriculars. Have one academic activity, which is, somehow linked to what you might study in college. So, if you're interested in journalism, write for the newspaper. If you're interested in medicine, volunteer at a local hospital or do some research, right? Pick a thing based on what you want to study in college. Computer science, do some sort of coding project or Olympiad, right? So that's the academic activity. The second is a community service activity to show that you're a concerned and engaged citizen. So that's what we mentioned earlier, volunteering at a senior center, tutoring students after school. And again, if you can actually tie this to some passion of yours, maybe what you want to study in college, even better. I think that looks, especially compelling. And then finally, some personality activity, right? Not necessarily linked to what you might want to major in college, but it's just something that that you have fun doing and that you like, and that you want to spend time kind of dedicated to, right? So that could be like the drama club, it could be painting, it could be any number of things that aren't things that you want to pursue professionally or academically, but that you just enjoy. So that's kind of a good way, I think, to think about kind of the triumvirate of activities that you might be pursuing.